Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today you're tuning in to Spell It Out, Magic, Reflections, and Shadow. And my topic today, which was actually suggested by a viewer, and I thank this viewer very much, is automatic writing, which is going to be a really fun topic. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and thank you guys so much for supporting the show. And thank you to Darian, who's a fan that's on live chat already. So if you guys do have any questions for Krista, let us know on the live chat, and we'll pass those along, and I'm sure she will be happy to share. We've got some great shows coming up in October. We have Holly Lindblom back the first week from Holly's Haunts, and she's going to be talking about some of the haunted places that she visited recently. We're going to follow that up with our good friends Mystic Mitten Paranormal from Detroit, and they're going to talk about haunted dolls. And that's a really, I've seen some creepy dolls over the years, so that should be a really fun show. So I'm really excited and looking forward to that one. And then we have, we're switching gears a little bit to some pagan topics. We have Madame Zulema back, and she'll be talking about the Day of the Dead and the Latino culture and the celebration of ancestry. And then we're going to end the month of October with our good friend Jackie Smith, who will be back. She's the owner, of course, of Coventry Creations, makes those beautiful Coventry spell candles that are just awesome. And she'll be talking about Samhain, so some of the Celtic and European ritual when it comes to ancestry as well. So that'll get us to Halloween. And it's kind of sad this year. We always do Halloween at our friend's haunted home. And of course, this time, no haunted houses. So unfortunately with the pandemic. But you guys stay safe out there. And I hope you're all, taking care of yourselves. Just real quick, get all the information on the show at our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. You can subscribe to our quarterly newsletter. We share some of our favorite episodes and things of that nature, some things we find online that we think you guys might enjoy. And also, if you can afford to, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. It does help us cover some of our production costs, and it's just a really nice thing. And if you can't, then by all means, enjoy the show. We're doing it for you guys, and we're having a lot of fun doing it, and it's totally a passion project. And thank you to those of you who have contributed a little bit on Ko-Fi. We are very, very grateful. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to Krista, and I'm excited to hear everything there is to know about automatic writing. So take it away, Krista.
Thanks, Michael. And I'm really looking forward to our October shows with their all-female paranormal and spiritual people. So it's going to be fun. And again, I did mention quickly that a viewer suggested the topic, and as well as some others. And I plan on doing another show with a guest on automatic writing, but I didn't have time to get the person yet. So I thought I'd just do a topic on what it is, how to do it, and some of the most interesting people that have actually done it. So I was really fascinated as I researched some aspects of it I did not know, and it's a truly fascinating topic. Now, the definition of automatic writing, most people know it, but I thought Britannica had a particularly good one, so I'm going to read it from Britannica. It's automatic writing in spiritualism is writing produced involuntarily when the subject's attention is ostensibly directed elsewhere. The phenomena may occur when the subject is in an alert, waking state or in a hypnotic trance, usually during a seance. What is produced may be unrelated words, fragments of poetry, epithets, puns, obscenities, or well-organized fantasies. It's also called psychography. And the Chinese call it Fuji, which means planchet writing. And they evidently have had a long history since the Song Dynasty of doing automatic writing, which I don't really get into in this show, but that would be another fascinating show to do just on the Chinese use of automatic writing, because there's just a lot of material in this topic. It's crazy. So when you think of automatic writing today, the tools that most people will use are either the Ouija board or a pen and pencil or paper. Also the typewriter for a few people. But in the spiritualist time, which was, around the turn of 1900s, they used a planchette, the precursor to the Ouija board, which was a small, usually heart-shaped, flat piece of wood with two-wheeled casters and a pencil-holding aperture. So that was like during, sort of the Victorian seances. And it seems like it was used a lot in seances, which I hadn't really thought about what people do with the Ouija board today in seances being actually automatic writing, but it is considered to be an aspect of automatic writing, and we're going to get into that a little bit more. So those are the tools. Now, why would anybody want to do automatic writing? And most of I listened to different people on YouTube talking about automatic writing, some that had been doing it for 30 years, some for a year. And there was definitely some common agreement as to why today people would do it. And even, in previous periods. One is simply to contact the dead and to have a conversation and get information with the dead. Another is as a spiritual practice to contact your own spiritual guides and other supernatural beings so that you yourself can be guided. And there was a woman who I'll mention a little later on that was really into this particular, is today really into this practice. Some use it for inspiration, which we're going to talk about, which is one of the most fascinating parts because there are famous poets that used it to gain really amazing works. So it wasn't just, some sort of suggestion as how to write or, you're doing a good job or something. So we're going to talk about that a little later on, which is the bulk of really what I want to talk about. People use it for creativity and also for psychic information. There's a playful element to it, but it seems like everyone that ends up using it ends up doing it for probably one of those reasons, basically, or a couple of those reasons. So those are some of the reasons why people will do it. Now, advice on how to do it, it's actually in some ways a very simple form. And most of us would know, today most people would say, oh, I'm going to sit down with a pencil or pen and paper, and I'm going to just start writing. And of course, there's, different views as to how to set up the environment around it and also your own state of mind. And the woman I found very interesting, which I briefly mentioned, her name is Marian Weatherburn, and she's a medium. You can find her on YouTube, and she's, I think, Australian. And she's the one that's been doing it for decades as a spiritual practice and a way to connect to her spirit guides. And she says it's really, really helpful. I felt she seemed very grounded, and I really liked her energy around it. So she suggests that you set a time ahead and tell your spirit guide or guides that you want to meet them at this time. So you say, okay, I want to meet you at 5 p.m. I'm going to be doing some automatic writing. So you set that in your mind. And then she says, like many of the ones that I've read, though not everybody that does automatic writing does this, but I think in sort of the spiritual movement today, people suggest setting up like a quiet space with candles, and so you won't be interrupted, putting aside 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and then you would then of course have your implements. And most people seem to be thinking today that having just paper and pen or pencil it's enough, though there is a famous example of someone using a typewriter, which I'm going to talk about a little later on. Now, Marian suggests that you can have questions, but to start off with just 2 or 3, and to have like your piece of paper with a big Q at the top, whatever your question is, and then space under it for each page. And so you're kind of ready to answer as you do the automatic writing. And then the actual form when you write, she suggests that if you look at examples of automatic writing, they're often very kind of all over the place. There's no grammar structure. They can be written in different style of handwriting than your normal handwriting. So that's the idea that you're sort of reaching deeper. So you don't worry about the sentence structure or punctuation. Now, this part reminded me of a great exercise that I used to do in Natalie Goldberg's book. I think it was Writing Down the Bones, about writing exercises. And she has an exercise called a timed writing where you sit down for, say, 10 minutes, you put the timer on, and you just start writing anything. You could even write something ridiculous, and you just keep your hand moving and you don't stop. So this does get some peculiar things out because I did it, and sometimes really some deeper, interesting, creative things. So again, that's sort of maybe a version of automatic writing that writers do to sort of release some of their deeper thoughts and tap into the vein of creativity. So that was basically what Marion had to say. There was this other Jennifer Hall, who's a psychic medium, and she said very similar things, though one of her differences was she thought it was a good idea to do it at the end of the day. And for me, I think that might be kind of hard, but I could see the value of kind of doing it at the end of the day. Then there was I don't know this particular person's name. I couldn't find it on YouTube, but the YouTube channel is called Be Hattie Life, BEHATILIFE. And she was the only one that talked about the physical sensations that happened to her when she was doing automatic writing. And this does happen. I've read it in some other cases where her hand and arm would get either very hot or cold once she sort of got into the automatic writing. And she was particularly got a lot of things like symbols that were repetitive and numbers that were repetitive. And so she was saying that can be very important. And she did this practice for over a year. So it seems like she had a lot of sort of real organic experience with it. So I thought that was interesting. She was also one of the few that I thought was smart to say that the kind of pen and pencil you use can make a big difference, which makes sense because you want something that's easy to write with. So she suggested the roller pen, which I would too, because I write in a journal all the time, and the roller pens are great. And then also a mechanical pencil would work well, she thought. So she used both and suggested that you use those type of implements if you're writing. So that's a little bit, you can see it's really very easy to do. It's not, in terms of, there's not a lot of things you have to learn to actually do it. And that might be initially some of the appeal of it. But what's really interesting is the kinds of people that were drawn into doing this. So we've gone over the tools and why people do it and advice on how to do it. So I wanted to spend a little more time on the different kinds of people that actually have done it and what they produced and some of their stories, which are both sort of positive and negative about what happens when you work with automatic writing. So just a quick kind of list of some of the people. I'm not going to talk about all these people, but I'm going to talk about some of them. There was, of course, John Dee and Edward Kelly, where they received the Enochian language in the 1600s. That's I think another topic for another show because it's so big. And we have the surrealist poet Robert Desnos, Sri Aurobindo, Jane Roberts, and then the other poets. Obviously, I don't know why I'm finding poets. I guess poets use it a lot, and famous poets, because one was Georgie Hydes Lee, who was Yeats's wife. And James Merrill and Sylvia Plath played around with it too. So there's like three of these I'm going to spend a little more time with because their stories are really interesting about it. For instance, I had no idea that Sri Aurobindo did this and did it off and on for a while. And it has some works and some of his books. You can easily find out, what books of his or teachings are connected to this practice. And he evidently first tried it at the end of his stay in Baroda, which was around 1904, because his brother, Baron, was producing some really amazing things with automatic writing. And you can see that's right around the time of the spiritualistic movement where it was really popular, the automatic writing during that time. But he also did something called script. And it was similar to automatic writing, but from what he considered a higher, more reliable source. And I am going to talk a little bit about the concept of the source, like what is the source behind the automatic writing, which is a little more complicated than what you can get into in a 30-minute show. But again, I'll give you some of the basic ideas. So even though he did this, his conclusion was that though there are sometimes phenomena which point to the intervention of beings of another plane, not always or often of a high order, the mass of such writings come from what he thought was the subconscious. And he thought that you would sometimes tap into sort of a brilliant vein in the subliminal, and that's where you'd get predictions of the future and statements of the present and past. But otherwise, what's kind of odd in this particular statement, he thought that it didn't have great value, yet he has teachings from the automatic writing. So there's a little I can't decide, was he for it? Was he against it? And this information I got from a site called The Incarnate Word, and they have a lot more about his connection to it and also Mother's connection to it, if you're interested. So that touches a little bit on the source, which was basically what people during, I guess, the spiritualistic movement time, they saw the source as being external and being like a deity or a dead person or someone like that. And as psychology gained sort of more popularity, a lot of people see it as connecting to the deep subconscious. But today, what's interesting, I would say people that do automatic writing generally see it as a connection going back to the spiritualistic movement to something outside of you. I think it can be both, and I think that there's not really any contradiction, but I think that has to do with how you view the mind. And in the Eastern tradition, for instance, they can view a yidam or deity as both real and internal. So there's not a sort of a contradiction in their mind, but the Western mind likes to sort of see it in black and white, I think. So that's a little bit about the source. There was another disciple of Sri Aurobindo, and I got this from, I'll put the link, it's a very long link, so I will put it in underneath the show because it's too long to go into. But in it, they say it was Nolini Kanta Gupta, which again was a senior disciple of Sri Aurobindo. And he wrote that there, quote, there are worlds upon worlds in a regular series from the most gross to the most subtle. Any of the beings from any of these worlds or planes can manifest himself, but he has to manifest through the instrumentality of the human medium, through the substance of the medium's mind, life, and body. Very often it is the makeup of the medium that predominates, and the being that manifests preserves very little of its own. So that's, again, addressing the concept of source. And I can see that. I would agree with that. So that the state of the medium, depending on how pure your temple is going to affect what's coming through you. And you could even say, your biases, so to speak. And that was, his view of it. And that's why, at least in the Sri Aurobindo world, they thought it was really not tapping into these higher beings most of the time, though some of the time it was. Now, getting into sort of the area that really got my attention because I write poetry, I guess, but also because I simply did not know the extent of the influence of automatic writing on some famous poets. That's what I want to spend a little bit of time on now. So Sylvia Plath just kind of played around with the Ouija board, and she evidently, though I didn't realize, she had a spirit guide named Pan that she would contact. And then she also wrote a poem called Ouija, which you can find very easily. So it was her husband, Ted Hughes, that actually suggested her using it to tap into the deep unconscious. And they were also inspired by William Butler Yeats, who I will talk about in a minute. And then the story I found probably the most intriguing was the one about the poet James Merrill. And it's from Lily Dale, the book Lily Dale by Christine Wicker. So it's pretty well known that, which to most people, but not me, so it's well known that he and his partner, David Jackson, spent 20 years consulting the Ouija board. And during that time, he produced a really a long epic poem. And it was, there's a great description in the book. I'm going to read it from the book. Christine Wicker writes, night after night in the cupola of their house in Stonington, Connecticut, they sat next to each other in lavender Victoria chairs, while the board sat in a round table topped with milk glass. They used the handle of an upside-down blue and white willow-ware teacup as their pointer and propped a mirror on a chair facing the table so they could see each other and the spirits could see them. Merrill kept one hand on the cup and transcribed with the other. So during this 20-year period, they talked to a spirit guide who was named Ephraim and claimed to be a Greek Jew who was a favorite of the Emperor Tiberius. And the poem, the three-part poem, it was an epic poem they wrote, was 560 pages, and it's called The Changing Light at Sandover. And from what I can tell, some people think this is a great poem and some people don't, but it has all kinds of archetypes and angels and demons in it, evidently. I haven't had a chance to read that particular poem of his, though I have read some of his other poetry. So what's interesting about the story with him, though, and his lover is that I guess the spirit guide, Ephraim, would give other kinds of guidance. And at one point told the men that they were highly evolved and not ordinary mortals. And they started to withdraw more from the world. And this is the part that really sort of shook me a little bit. But this Ephraim character encouraged the couple to take lovers indiscriminately, which they took that advice, and James Merrill ended up dying of complications from AIDS. So you can see that, just because someone is a spirit guide or you're getting information, perhaps it's not always good to take all the advice, So it's just another human being. And one of the things that I've always questioned is, how do you know that the spirit's telling you the truth about what he or she is? This is a topic I'm hoping to address later. How do you check and make sure? Because people lie, so why wouldn't spirits lie? So that's something you'd have to consider no matter what. And I think you can always weigh in as far as, well, what is it the spirit wants me to do? Is it something that seems pretty helpful, or is it something that could put me in harm's way? That could be a criteria that you use. So but he doesn't seem to have any regrets from what I could tell reading about what he thought about using the Ouija board. And in fact, in an interview in Bomb magazine written by Thomas Bolt, July 1st, 1991, this is what Merrill said himself about using the Ouija board. Quote, "If it's still yourself you're drawing upon, then that self is much stranger and freer and more far-seeing than the one you thought you knew. Of course, there are disciplines that are with grander pedigrees and similar goals. The board happens to be ours." So that's kind of cool. They felt like it was good enough to use, and they're not putting it down at any point. So I thought, though, the whole story was fascinating. I had no idea that anyone had spent that much of time, using the Ouija board to get something like a poem or something really creative like that. And then the last person I want to mention, as far as what really I didn't know used automatic writing, and to the extent, was connected to William Butler Yeats, and it was his young wife, Georgie Hyde Lees, who he called her George. And I found this particular quote from Yeats in JSTOR Daily, and the actual title of the article is W.B. Yeats's Live-In Spirit Medium by Emily Ludolf, and it was written December 5th, 2018. And again, I'll put some of these under the YouTube once I finish it, so you'll see the links. So this is what Yeats said. He said, "On the afternoon of October 24th, 1917, 4 days after my marriage, my wife surprised me by attempting automatic writing. What came in disjointed sentences and almost illegible writing was so exciting, sometimes so profound, that I persuaded her to give an hour or two day after day to the unknown writer." And so they actually set up weekly sessions for the first 3 years together, and they would do these automatic writings. And it created 4,000 pages of material. That this is George and not Yeats doing this, and that scholars have only in the recent years realized the importance of these automatic writings on Yeats's work. And she was not really credited, at least initially, by Yeats at all. And I guess he's, after like the 7th edition or 8th edition, he kind of mentions her as, having been the source of, at least I think the work, A Vision is one of the works credited to her. And so I was really floored by that it was not simply something that was cool or interesting, but actually influenced one of the greatest poets. You can say certainly in Ireland's history, and certainly I love a lot of Yeats's, though I was very disappointed that he didn't give her credit. Though, in history's correcting the fact that she is going to be receiving the credit. And it doesn't seem like she necessarily was upset by it, because there are other cases where I read where there was a medium that sued someone because he wanted to claim and make a book out of something that she had actually been the one to channel, and she won. And that's another interesting case if you look up into it. So anyway, I was really, really fascinated with the uses of automatic writing in general, and that they have been going on for a long time, that there can be some real physical things that happen to people when they do automatic writing. What I can say from, the little bit of time I spent researching it is that it seems like the more you do it, you're going to get, of course, like anything else, more results. And one of the things I wanted to share was I did once go to, I got a reading from a woman who offered me a reading for free when I was working at the Bodhi Tree. I would hire people to do readings, and oftentimes they'd offer me a reading to see if I would like them. And I very rarely would accept the reading unless I was really looking for a fill-in there. But for some reason, I decided to accept the reading, and I was really glad I did. I didn't know exactly what she was going to do, but she had been using a form of automatic writing for over 20 years as a spiritual practice. And so I went to where I think her workspace, and I only did like a 15-minute reading. But what's really interesting was the way she did it. She had a big legal pad and a pen, and then she, didn't really, I think maybe she said my name or something, and opened up the session, and then just wrote for quite a long time. She must have written maybe 12 pages or so. I have it somewhere, and I couldn't find it. And big sort of scrawling handwriting. But when she was doing it, one of the things that I noticed was the whole room changed. The whole energy in the room was so different, and really this beautiful energy just entered in through the room. And I was so struck by that. I felt something had really happened. And I think that's what really, impressed me the most, was there was something she was really calling in or connecting. And then after she did that part, she let me ask some questions, which some of them were very mundane questions that I asked, and then she would answer them and write them down. So I really, it stuck with me, that experience. And I'm one of these people, I really do feel energy, and I know it's real on some level when I do. So I was very touched by the whole experience. Her first name was Denise, and I think it could have been Denise Williams, but I was going to, again, look for her name too to see if that's the person I'm thinking of. But it was really quite a wonderful experience. So I think it's something that you can go in and do for yourself or go to other people. I think just take normal precautions in any spiritual practice. There are always risks. And I realized that too. That's why with James Merrill, there was both something very powerful and good, and then also something kind of not so great about the advice he got from the automatic writing. So as always, make sure that you trust your deeper intuition and you do what you think really is helpful. And I would say if you're going through an unstable mental time, perhaps it's not the greatest time to do automatic writing. But I don't think you have to be in some sort of like pure high vibration to do it. So I think that's kind of ridiculous. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this session about automatic writing. I so enjoyed learning more about it, and we do plan to have a guest on at some point who does it. So have a great week, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together.